Okay everyone, so in this next video, let's go and try to work on Spring4Shell CVE 2022. And we have here task 1. In late March 2022, two remote command execution vulnerabilities in the Java Spring framework were made public. The first of these vulnerabilities affects the component of the framework called Spring Cloud Functions. The second, arguably more serious vulnerability, affects a component in the Spring core, the heart of the framework, thus significantly increasing the vulnerability's potential impact and earning in the name Spring4Shell, a play on Log4Shell. As we all know, there's also a vulnerability Log4Shell that has just been released this 2021 from Apache. And we have here the name of a brutal vulnerability disclosed at the end of the 2021. For various reasons, there has been a lot of confusion surrounding these vulnerabilities in the wider InfoSec community. As such, this room may be updated as new information comes to light. On a similar note, the impact of Spring4Shell is currently unknown. Only time will tell how widespread the vulnerability is in the wild. This room will provide an overview of the Spring4Shell remote code execution vulnerability in the Spring core, as well as give you an opportunity to exploit it for yourself in the vulnerable machine attached to this task. We will start by taking a look at the vulnerability at a high level before exploiting the target machine for ourselves. So let's begin. And I was able to get my 365 streak here. Okay guys, I've already deployed our attack box here. Just wanted to save some time while deploying this. So now let's go and try to find and continue with our vulnerability background here. So overview, Spring4Shell was originally released as a 0-day in now deleted thread of tweets. It was quickly identified as a bypass of the patch for CVE 2010-1622, a vulnerability in earlier versions of the Spring framework which allowed attackers to obtain remote command execution by abusing the way in which Spring handles data sent in HTTP requests. In short, the vulnerability allows attackers to upload a web shell, a piece of code which attempts or accepts commands from the attacker that the web server is then tricked into executing, to the vulnerable server achieving remote command execution. How does it work? To understand Spring4Shell, it is important that we understand CVE 2010-1622. Spring Model View Controller is part of the Spring framework, which makes it easy to develop web applications following the MVC design pattern. One of the features of Spring MVC is that it automatically instantiates and populates an object of a specified class when a request is made based on the parameters sent to the endpoint. In simple terms, this could be abused to override important attributes of the parent class, resulting in remote code execution. Spring4Shell works along similar lines by passing the mitigations that were added to patch CVE 2010-1622. The majority of the exploits for the Spring4Shell vulnerability operate by forcing the application to write a malicious .jsp file, effectively plain text Java, which Tomcat can execute, much like a PHP web server would execute files with a .php extension to the web server. This web shell can then be executed to gain remote command execution over the target. Fortunately, despite how commonly used the Spring framework is, the conditions in which the vulnerability can be exploited are actually fairly limited. The Spring4Shell vulnerability affects Spring Core before version 5.2 as well as in versions 5.3.0 to 17, 5.2.0 to 19, running on a version of the Java Development Kit greater than or equal to 9. The publicly available exploits currently available only work on applications deployed to Apache Tomcats as worst. However, the Spring framework maintainers have stated that they believe that there may be other ways to exploit the vulnerability. Current conditions for vulnerability, as stated in the Spring announcement of the vulnerability can be summarized as follows: JDK 9+, a vulnerable version of the Spring framework; Apache Tomcat as a server for the Spring application package as war; a dependency on the Spring Web MVC and or Spring Web Flux components of the Spring framework; It is worth noting, however, that this may change over time as other ways to exploit the vulnerability are discovered. Remediation. Fortunately, patch versions of the Spring framework have been released to remediate Spring4Shell. Ensure that you are using version of Spring released after patch 18 of minor release 5.3 or after patch 20 if using minor release 5.2. Upgrading the version of the framework is enough to remove the vulnerability from your applications. If upgrading is not possible, it is possible to somewhat mitigate this vulnerability by setting a block list of vulnerable field patterns. More advice on this can be found here. So there's a Spring blog here. I've actually already read some of this. Now let's go and have the practical exploitation here. So we can see here, download the task files. We've covered the theory now. It's time to exploit the target. As this is a network-based exploit, you will need to use the TryHackMe attack box or a local virtual machine in order to run the exploit. Copies of the exploit code can be obtained in 3 places. Attached to this task, accessible using the blue download task files, or on port 8080 of the target machine. So we have the IP here, and if we try to actually open the link here, you will see it will be opening the exploit for us, or directly on the attack box root rooms Spring4Shell exploit dash or .py. This will already have been extracted from the archive for your convenience. Use whichever method is easiest to obtain the copy of the exploit.zip file. The password for this archive is TryHackMe. So if you download the file here, I've actually already done this, and that's why I'm saying you'll need to use this password. When you unzip the archive, you should find a single Python script, exploit.py. This is a modified version of the proof of concept that's currently circulating online. It is slightly more useful or slightly more user-friendly than the original obtained here. However, you may use whichever version you wish. This task will assume that you are using the code provided. Read through the exploit code and ensure that you are happy that it does what it claims to do. You should always review unknown exploits before running them. That's one of the rule of thumb. We should always be reviewing exploits before we try to run them on our machine. Having satisfactorily completed our code review, let's start by taking a look at the help menu for the exploit. So we can try to go and do that. Let's first ls here, cd is this located in roots, toast, or sorry, it should be cd rooms ls cd Spring4Shell ls, and we have that exploit.py. And if we try to, let me just increase this and see nano exploit.py if there's nano here, and there we go. We have the password here. It's importing request argument parsed, and this is the content of the code. So I would suggest that you try to read through it. Let's first exit here. And now let's go back here. We can see the following. We have positional arguments, URL. We have the target URL, optional arguments, name of the file to upload. It has a default tomcat.jsp, then -p password to protect the shell with, and -d directory, -- directory, the upload path for the file, default root. So we can actually maximize the use. I think I haven't actually done one of the tasks here, but later we'll talk more about that. So the script requires one argument URL. This specifies the target for the post request. The other 3 optional arguments can be ignored in the current context. Let's start by taking a look at the website in the browser on this link. This may vary depending on your IP address that was provided to you by TryHackMe. So it says here we can easily find our target URL by checking the source code of the website homepage. We have that here, and it's still loading on my side. Specifically, we are looking for the action of the contact form, the only post request available to us. This is found on line 20. So we can see that it has already loaded. We can try to check view page source, and we do have here the contact form action. As you can see here, we have a method and it's using a post method. The action is forward slash, meaning that our target URL will simply be the following. The trailing slash is very important here. Time to use the exploit. Execute the script. If you are using the attack box, navigate to the folder, root room Spring4Shell. You should receive output similar to the following. Okay, so we can see that here. Let's just close this, and go here, and we can try to go and let's follow the instruction here. Exploit the following IP address. So we'll need to go get this IP address, then go here, and then use the exploit.py, then add the IP address. Okay, so we have 10.10 HTTP 10.10.294.93, and don't forget the action here, and let's see here. Okay, we had a issue with our connection here. Let's see. Okay, so sorry, made a mistake there. It's not going to be this guy here. Should be 224.93. That's made a mistake there. It should be 224. And shall upload successfully. We have tomcat var.jsp password who am I. Now if we go through here, we can actually try to so we now have a web shell uploaded. So this means we can actually utilize the code here to upload files. So I'm going to try that out for our bonus question here, but for now let's just read through here. Navigate to the link provided by the expert to see this action. You can change which command gets run by changing the CMD parameter. By default, the command is who am I. Once the exploit has been successfully won, it cannot be used again until the application has been restarted. If you upload the web shell with the wrong name or directory path, then you will need to terminate and redeploy the target machine. So follow the steps and tasks exploit Spring4Shell and obtain a web shell. We can try to work on having a reversed shell on the target and bind shell, but I'm going to have a separate video for that. Now we can try to look for the flag in the root flag.txt here. So let's go and try to. We were provided here. You would see here. Copy, paste. So we cannot paste it that way. So we can just try to open link. So you can copy this. Copy link address. So it's not working that way. So let's just go and use Notepad here for that. THM and CMD. Who am I? Let's make sure that we have this. Let's try to work on this. There we go. We have root. We were able to execute this. If we try to do ls-la, we get to find some of the information. Here we can also do cat etc passwords, and we can find the users of the the server here. And what is the root flag.txt? So we can first try to root flag.txt. Perhaps that's, and there we go, guys. We now have our root flag.txt. And for the conclusion, congratulations, you have reached the end of the Spring4Shell room. Having completed this room, you should hopefully have a high level understanding of the vulnerability and be comfortable attacking applications vulnerable to CVE 2022-22965. As mentioned previously, this vulnerability has the potential to be very widespread, but only time will tell how serious it truly is. Keep an eye out and make sure that you patch any systems you are responsible for. If you would like to read more about Spring4Shell, you might find the following resources informative. We have the announcement here, Luna Sex blog post, Praetorian blog post, write up for CV 2010-1622, and we can now try to go and test this out. So that's it for this room, guys. One of the things that I'm going to try to work on is another video separate from this video. I'd like this to be a separate video for the bonus option here, how to perform a reverse or a bind shell on the target. So we'll try to work on a reverse shell on the next video.